The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 6th day of this sesshin, this Rohatsu sesshin at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in December 2021. And I'd like to continue sharing some universal teachings that are as relevant to Zen as they are to any other religion, assuming a depth of that religion. The challenge is that when religions are brand new, they are fresh, they are deep often, if they are authentic religions, that they're really spiritual traditions in the making. And as time goes on, they begin to get kind of embedded and codified and solidified, and the essence of the spiritual practice begins to drain out. This has happened with every single major religion that we know of, including Buddhism, actually. And it's happened many times over in Buddhism, as a matter of fact. And the same with other religions. Periodically, there is somebody who's initially claimed to be a heretic who reinvigorates that religion, that spiritual practice, by going to the root of it. Hakuin was one such person in the 18th century in Japan, at a time when Zen was, Rinzai Zen in particular, was pretty moribund. And Dogen in the 11th century, again, also the same. And here and there, throughout China, there have been masters that reinvigorated what was a dying religion. In Christianity as well, there are mystics who deeply realized the essence of the spiritual teaching of that religion, when all else was, as I said, pretty rigid. So let's start with the words of Ryokan, who was a Japanese poet, totally free human being, deeply realized. He was considered something of a fool, and often the most deeply spiritual people are considered fools because they don't necessarily fit within any given format, and so people don't know what to do with them. They have stepped out of the bounds of, in the case of Ryokan, normal society. He was known for loving to play with the kids. And there's a poem, let's see if I can find that particular one. Yes, there's a poem where she speaks to this. First days of spring, the sky is bright blue, the sun huge and warm, everything's turning green. Carrying my monk's bowl, I walk into the village to beg for my daily meal. The children spot me at the temple gate and happily crowd around, dragging at my arms till I stop. I put my bowl on a white rock, hang my bag on a branch, and first we braid grasses and play tug-of-war. Then we take turns singing and keeping a kickball in the air. I kick the ball and they sing. They kick and I sing. Time is forgotten. The hours fly. People passing by point at me and laugh. Why are you acting like such a fool? I nod my head and don't answer. I could say something, but why? Do you want to know what's in my heart? From the beginning of time, just this, just this. And then another poem, also by Ryokan. In all 10 directions of the universe, there is only one truth. When we see clearly, the great teachings are all the same. What can ever be lost? What can be attained? If we attain something, it was there from the beginning of time. If we lose something, it is hiding somewhere near us. Look, this ball in my pocket. Can you see how priceless it is? In all the 10 directions of the universe, there is only one truth. And different spiritual traditions have different terminology to describe it, but the truth is the same when we reach deeply enough. And I'd like to share also now with you a book that unfortunately is out of print. It's called 40 Days, and it's subtitled The Diary of a Traditional Solitary Sufi Retreat. And the woman that wrote it was German by birth, but grew up in Turkey. I think her father was some form of consultant there, and she herself became a psychologist and was drawn to Islam and became a Muslim, and then somehow connected with the Sufi tradition, which is or was, when I was living there, alive and well in Turkey and in Central Asia as well. The Sufis do not advertise themselves, but what is realized through the practices that they do. In the particular case of the Sufis that live in Turkey, and they're known as the Mevlana or Mevlevi, the whirling dervishes, and their practice is turning. And they have a particular flute. It's played through the nose, by the nose. It's a nose flute, and the Sufis will turn and turn and turn and turn, and in the turning forget themselves so completely. It's similar to what we work for in our Zazen, extending the out breath over and over and over again. We begin to forget ourselves. It does take time. It's not instant. And I'm sure that any of the Sufis that turn do not reach that point of, one might call it annihilation, although that's a kind of a pejorative term, an experience of oneness with God, or an experience of oneness with our true nature. And then, of course, there's much more to it than that. But one of the most accessible ways of teachings are through the Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi, who finally ended up living and dying in Konya, Turkey. Actually, a few other places in Turkey, Üsküdar, perhaps. And he came from a long tradition of spiritual masters. His father was as well. Let me share just a few things about this 40-day retreat that Michaela Özelcel undertook, guided by a sheikh. Özelcel is was her married name. Unfortunately or sadly, as she emerged from her 40-day retreat, she learned from her in-laws that her husband was divorcing her and marrying a woman much, much younger than she was, who had been a child at their wedding. But things happen. Things happen. It would have happened regardless of whether she went on retreat or not. But for her, the retreat was a profound experience. And the material in the retreat was teachings from the Quran, and from zikr, which is a Muslim practice of calling the names of God. So in the foreword is a quote from Rumi: "Talking cannot bring about understanding. Talking can only bring you to the point where the listener gets the disturbing feeling that outside this world perceived by our senses lies another world that we must try to find." That, in a nutshell, is what brings people to spiritual practice. Talking cannot bring about understanding. Talking can only bring you to the point where the listener gets the disturbing feeling that outside this world perceived by our senses lies another world that we must try to find. And that world is right here now, never was anywhere else, and is accessible through spiritual practice, deep, ongoing spiritual practice. It's not going to be uncovered in a flash. It is something that we must work toward, and we work toward it through seeing where we are caught in delusion, delusive thinking, delusive ideas, in delusion. And as we see where we're caught, somehow what happens is that caught place becomes less caught, and we become a little bit more free. It's not something that people really recognize about Zen practice or any other spiritual practice. It is, we have this idea that Kensho awaits, and it's this amazing ecstatic experience. Well, it might be, it might not be. It depends on a person's history, a person's personality, all kinds of things. And so while you can read, for example, the enlightenment stories in the 3 pillars of Zen, that's not necessarily how it is going to unfold for you. Of course, you have to do the practice in order to uncover an opening. And that is a challenge because, as I said, in order to uncover this true nature, you have to see where you're caught in not seeing it. And that's not what people are excited about. We often feel that we're not accomplishing our practice the way we ought to be accomplishing it when things come up and they're challenging to experience. But the amazing thing is, for example, as we're doing Zazen, and a memory comes up of a time when we behaved in a way less than compassionate, less than optimal, less than kind, less than clear, even though we didn't realize it at the time. We see it more clearly now. And feelings of remorse come up. And also what can rise as well is a sincere commitment to not behaving in those ways again. And that automatically thins out the veil that covers our unawareness of our true nature and offers us a little bit more freedom. It's important to not try to escape from those feelings if they do come up, not to bring them up. We're not working towards just rehashing the past. But if these things come up, and they will, as we deepen our Zazen, then there is our opportunity to relinquish the habit pattern that created them in the first place, which was an attachment to an idea of who we assume we have to be or we are. That was the thing about Ryokan. He was so free that he could simply stop and play with the kids, despite people pointing and laughing and say, look at the fool. There is, of course, a very beloved character in Turkey called Nasruddin Hoca. Hoca means teacher in Turkish. And Nasruddin was considered similar to Ryokan. People didn't know whether he was really out to lunch or whether he was deeply wise. And there are many, many stories about him that are really teaching stories. One, for example, is there is Nasruddin in the city looking all around under a streetlight. And a friend comes up and says, yo, Nasruddin, what are you looking for? And he says, I'm looking for my keys. And so they look together, and after a while, the friend says, well, you know, where exactly did you lose them? And Nasruddin said, well, over there in that dark corner. And the friend says, well, why are you looking here under the streetlight? Well, because there's light here. And he's pictured in many of the Turkish cities and villages as riding on backwards on a donkey. But his teachings can have a sincere ring of truth. For example, we, in our spiritual practice, particularly early on, we look everywhere except where we will find the answer. And the answer, of course, is within. And this is what Rumi is constantly working to teach us as well. And Meister Eckhart and the Chinese Chan masters and modern Zen masters. Don't go over there and try to read about it in a book and find the answer in a book, because that is only the answer in a book. It is not any kind of an answer that will liberate you. The only answer that will liberate you comes from turning within. This is what the Buddha recognized after 6 years of doing intensive practice in the forests with the ascetic teachers. He realized that that was not going to bring him his answers, that his answers could only come from within. Flora Courtois, who was a contemporary American woman who had this sense that there was something really important. I can't remember what her exact question was, but at any rate, she was seeking the answer to something that had come up for her as a child. And it was basically, is there an underlying truth that is always true, regardless of circumstance? This came about because as a kid, she started collecting aphorisms. And whenever a situation took place, she would run to her collection of aphorisms and try to find the aphorism that fit the situation, and discovered really early on that as soon as the situation was done, the aphorism no longer fit. And that's what took her to asking, is there a truth that's always true, regardless? It doesn't matter whether the situation is here or there, or has been, or is yet to come. Is there an underlying truth? And this question got more and more intense for her as she grew older and she went off to college and began to take courses in psychology and various other subjects that she thought might give her an answer. She also went to the local Catholic priest, who was apparently a very popular young man with the college students, and asked him the same question. He gave her a stack of books to read. And she did read them, but she realized even as she received them from him that the answer was not going to be in those books. They were the frozen dogma of what had once been a true religion. And so she finally was forced to go within and ask her questions within. And this continued for increasingly intensive period of time. And eventually, when she was home during a Thanksgiving vacation, she was sitting in her room and she glanced at the little desk in her room, and suddenly, as she wrote, the world turned on its axis and she was free. And it changed her life for the rest of her life, really. She found herself freely racing to school to dive into her practices, her studies, and then racing home and taking a quick nap, and filled with joy. She was trying to find somebody who would answer her question about what had happened to her. As near as she could tell, instead of her locus of perception being right here, somehow it had disappeared, and there was no point that was a finite point of perception. It's as if she was everywhere, yet nowhere. Some years later, there was a man, I don't remember his name, but he had a kind of a most of the way, but not complete opening, spiritual opening, and wrote a book called On Having No Head. I think his name was Douglas Harding. Flora knew him and commented to me at one point that he had failed to go all the way. This is also true for the woman that wrote a book called Collision with the Infinite, who through, she was a student of, one of the Indian masters who was teaching TM, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and it was fairly advanced in TM, as was her brother. In fact, her brother apparently even went to Switzerland to do the advanced practice. She married a Frenchman and had a child, and at one point she was stepping off a bus in Paris and suddenly had a deep insight into emptiness. The problem was that she got stuck there for 11 years. She tried to find out what was going on. She went to psychiatrists who told her she was schizophrenic. She went to a so-called Zen master who I don't believe was really a master, who told her that he had no clues because it never had happened to him, which meant that he had never had a Kensho experience. And finally, eventually, on a camping trip all by herself in the forest, she came out the other end, because form is emptiness, but emptiness is also form. And if you're stuck in emptiness, you're stuck in a no man's land or no person's land. And it is a very rarefied situation that has no ground under it. And this is why it's important in doing the practice not to find yourself dismayed if it's not going along as fast as you think it ought to, because it's important for this groundwork to be laid through ongoing deepening practice, seeing where we're caught, working with those caught places to let them go, through deep questioning, not this kind of questioning, but questioning that goes beyond words, because it's only beyond words that the answers can be found. And all the great spiritual masters of the ages have said exactly the same thing, no matter what spiritual tradition they are from. And let me share just a little bit more of Michaela's story. She ended up doing this solo retreat in an unheated apartment in Istanbul in January. And I can tell you that that is a cold place. And on occasion, the water heater would work. On occasion, it would not work. And if it did work, it didn't give her much water to do much of a shower. The sheikh brought her food, minimal food, because it was also a fasting retreat. And here is something very important to know about that, and that is that it is not appropriate to undertake a fasting retreat without a guide. You can find yourself in a very unhealthy place and a very unfortunate place. And I'll tell you this as well, and that is that many years ago, when I was in college and taking educational psychology, there was a study that took, I think it lasted for two weeks only. And it took a group of young, healthy men, and they fasted for that period of time. And unfortunately, a certain number of them actually had psychotic breaks. It was not a healthy thing for them to do. And I don't remember the details of the fast, whether it was simply a water fast or what. But it's important, if you are considering doing a fasting retreat, that you only do it with someone who is a guide, who knows what they're doing. Because you can get yourself into, like I said, some pretty funky mind states. When I was in Mexico with Mitra-roshi, one of his senior students came through and decided to do a week-long fast with another student there. And they found a little building to do it in, and just did zazen and drank water. That was it. And every so often, this student of Roshi's would come over and exclaim about how clear he felt. But in observing his behavior, it was anything but clear. So be careful. In this case, Michaela was day by day guided by this sheikh who brought her specific food and also weaned her back into eating towards the end of the retreat, so she didn't suddenly eat a whole bunch of food and possibly die, because you can do that if you suddenly eat when you have been starving yourself. So here she writes on day 37 of the retreat, "Again a day where nothing fits. I'm slowly getting used to this regular back and forth. Surely it has a meaning. Perhaps it is a form of preventive hardening for the time after the Havit. The Havit is the retreat. So that I'll learn to accept with equanimity the good days and the bad days, till I learn that neither one nor the other exists. I know with greater and greater certainty what I don't want to do, reading or any other purely cognitive activities. I have such a craving for the direct closeness that only becomes accessible through intuitive approaches, yearning for the way of the heart. Only how? All I can give is my defective zikrs. The result is in other hands. I can't do anything but make an honest effort." That, I think, those of you who've been doing sesshin for a while can relate to. And then here is a poem by Rumi. Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. Ever since they cut me from the reed bed, my wail has caused men and women to weep. I want a heart torn open with longing to share the painful of this love. Whoever has been parted from his source longs to return to that state of union. That is what brings us to practice. And through practice, we can return. And we can come to live fully, knowing this, what is beyond any idea of me, and yet function fully in the world as somebody with particular characteristics. And last, this from Hafiz, is one of my favorites, Sufi poets. This is from a book called I Heard God Laughing, Renderings of Hafiz. Let's see, try to find the one that I had chosen to share. For a while, we've all come to the right place. We all sit in God's classroom. Now, the only thing left for us to do, my dear, is to stop throwing spitballs for a while. Zen practice is challenging, but so infinitely rewarding. This yearning to let yourself die into it, to seek deeply beyond words, and seek deeply enough, long enough, with great enough persistence. Little by little, who you think you are is whittled away. And as Rumi would say, you walk into the sea and you become the sea. Suddenly you are no more. It can sound frightening, but the reality of it is quite amazing. And when we see through our self-image to the degree that we can become free of it, then we are able to live life fully, accurately, appropriately, freely, no matter what comes along. So we have one more full day, and then in this sesshin, we are sitting the night. It's not required, it's simply encouraged. And there will be more tomorrow about what follows on the 8th morning, which is a ceremony honoring the Buddha's enlightenment on the day that is memorialized as the day he did it, the 8th of December. So in this second to the last day, which is nearly gone at this point, give yourself even more deeply to this practice, because you can. That you have been sitting this many days with this level of concentration means that you have developed a clarity and a joriki, the spiritual energy that you are unlikely to be fully aware of, but it's there nonetheless. And you can jump even more deeply as a result of the work you've been doing so far. So don't let up. Keep going. Keep going. What an amazing opportunity this is to open to what is. I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.